In situations like these, we've become so used to the idea of optimal space occupation that we expect certain players to rotate or invert into predefined positions, and by doing so, you can overload the defense and get lots of players near the ball. But Spurs' new manager Thomas Frank doesn't seem to think that this is the best idea, and is going back to a system that has become increasingly rare in modern football, with an expansive shape that can create danger far away from where the ball is in the moment. And if it's successful, it could lead to some surprising results, but there's one key weakness that could undo everything. Let's take a look. Welcome back to Football Meta. Thomas Frank is not wasting any time implementing his ideas at Spurs, and we're already seeing the foundations being laid of a well-balanced system. And it was their most recent 2-0 win over Man City that seems to have caught everyone's attention, with a commanding performance both on and off the ball. And what was so impressive was their ability to deal with the press from Man City and find space far away from where the move originally started. And it's all down to the simple idea of double width. The concept essentially boils down to keeping two players ready on the opposite flank and in the same vertical channel. That way, when your team switches play, you instantly have the support to push forward, and you could potentially overload the opposition's fullback with a simple overlapping run from your own fullback. It was essentially how the majority of teams used their fullbacks around 10 to 15 years ago before the idea of inverted fullbacks became such a widespread idea. In fact, in modern football, we've become so used to seeing the opposite fullback pick up a position in the centre, with teams only keeping one player out wide, so when they do receive the ball, they find themselves in a 1v1, and there are players in the centre running forward. Think of players like Cucurella at Chelsea, Calafiori at Arsenal, or even the way Postecoglou used his fullbacks last season, further up the pitch and in an inverted position. And generally speaking, this way of using fullbacks is still extremely widespread and dangerous if done correctly. But the way Thomas Frank is using his fullbacks is opening up different spaces that allows other players to flourish. The main reason why this use of a fullback out wide lost its popularity was because it was seen as a waste of a channel. By having two players in this vertical space, it meant it was difficult to get more players involved in the attack. And compared to modern positional systems like the 3-2-5, it does in fact usually end up with one less player on the defensive line. But why this shape may be increasing in popularity once again is because of how teams are looking to defend. And because the majority of teams now adopt a man-oriented press, having two players far away from the ball can create big gaps through the middle for other players to move into. Furthermore, another advantage of this shape is that it doesn't require any complex timings and rotations, and the players will already start in the correct position. With Vicario in possession, the fullbacks are as wide as possible hugging the touchline, while the centre-backs also split wide. In the centre, whilst they initially start with a double pivot, as they push slightly further up the pitch, they'll only keep one player in this central position, with Bentancur usually stepping slightly further up the pitch. This wide shape right from the start of the move makes it difficult for the opponent to close off every pass. If they man-mark the opposition, which is arguably the most common approach, Spurs will move out wide and go down the line, where Richarlison and Sarr can also move over to help out. This idea is visible in the goal that made it 1-0 against Man City. Spurs play out from the back with City locked into a man-marking system. Marmoush has to delay his run out wide into Porro because if he goes too soon, it opens up a central channel which can be more dangerous. So Romero has the option out wide available. If the opposition doesn't effectively cover this pass through the middle, then you can end up with a similar scenario that Burnley faced, with Romero playing a ball right through the middle into Richarlison, who has support from Sarr breaking forward and finding Brennan Johnson in behind the defence. So, as City want to avoid this more direct route to goal, play moves out wide. And from here, Spurs move Richarlison and Sarr over to this flank, and an excellent flick forward into Richarlison, who beats the offside trap, leaves him in acres of space to push forward and find Johnson in the centre. As Spurs gain control, the centre-backs are even wider and the full-backs maintain their position out wide. They don't push forward onto the defensive line, but are essentially moving in the same vertical channel as the winger. Because this shape is so expansive, with the front three stretched out and the fullbacks in support, there are these central channels that can be attacked from a deeper position. On the left, we usually see Bentancur running into this channel, while on the right, Sarr will often attack forward, meaning Spurs can end up with 4 players on the back line consistently. And at times, if the moment is right, then nothing is stopping the fullbacks from underlapping into this position, or attacking forward with the wingers moving inside. Essentially, while you only end up with 4 players on the back line, the combination of which players are in which space can change consistently. Now, because Spurs are so spread out, it does mean play will often develop on the flanks, patiently rotating from side to side as there isn't an excessive amount of support in the centre. When switching play, it means they often end up with the overlapping run from the fullback being played in behind and crossing into the box, which is reflected in their statistics. By taking a look on FOTMob, we can see how they're currently ranked second for the most amount of successful crosses per match, with a cross success of 31.6%. Interestingly, even though this system is great at exploiting space far away from the ball, Thomas Frank wants his players to keep the ball on the ground, with Spurs ranking low for long balls and the accuracy of these long balls as well. If you want to stay up to date with Spurs' statistics and impressive performances so far, then FOTMob is my go-to app for all things Premier League and world football, and you can get started for free by downloading the app with the link in the description or pinned comment down below. Now, even when Spurs enter the final third, they still want to keep this shape as wide as possible. Take, for example, Richarlison's incredible goal to make it 2-0. We can see that even though play is developing on the right, Spence and Bergvall are still ready on the opposite flank. Then, as they break forward, Bergvall can disguise his run into the box, and Spence is free if needed on the edge of the box. It's an offensive shape that is not overly complicated, but because of the current defensive landscape, it seems to be the perfect moment for it to make a comeback. And speaking of defensive shapes, Spurs have also demonstrated an excellent aggressive man-oriented system, and is one of the main reasons why they've been so successful in their opening games. In their 2-0 win against Man City, the initial press was mostly done with the left winger Brennan Johnson and the striker Richarlison picking up the centre-backs. This meant the left back Spence would push forward onto City's right back, and the left back was picked up by new signing Kudus. With all the other players latching on in midfield and the defensive line, this gave Man City little time to build from the back, and as they attempted to circulate possession, even the centre-back Van der Ven pushed all the way up the pitch to close down any vacant City player. It means in a situation like this, Spurs can end up with their centre-back, their full-back, their winger and holding midfielder as the most advanced players on the pitch. And in the moments where the opponent is able to push forward, other players will need to fill in the gaps defensively. For example here with Bentancur essentially covering the run as the fullback. Now, this idea of man marking is certainly not unique to Thomas Frank or Spurs in particular, and it is a trend we saw a lot of in the previous season. If you want to know more, I've recently made an in-depth breakdown on man marking systems, and we also highlighted how there is one specific vulnerability, and that is how you decide to pick up the extra player. In fact, when adopting a man-marking system, the opposition always has a man advantage because of the goalkeeper, and there are a few different ways teams can look to deal with this threat. Some will give him time on the ball but ensure he has no one to pass to, while others will look to close him down quickly and force a rushed pass. If done correctly, then this is by far the trickiest situation to deal with. The striker will press at an angle, ensuring there is no easy pass into the free player, and the easy options in the centre are quickly closed down as well. And well, this is how Spurs made it 2-0 against Man City, capitalising on a big mistake from Trafford in goal. Richarlison quickly rushes forward and curves his run so the pass can't be made, meaning if City want to find the free player, the only way is indirectly through the centre. Spurs know this, and by pressing at an angle, they're able to win the ball back immediately. Obviously, this is an extreme scenario as it was a pretty blatant error from the goalkeeper, but the principle remains the same, and by pressing the keeper at an angle and closing down the only player that can pass it into the defensive weak spot, there aren't many options for the opponent. But now we also need to touch on some of the vulnerabilities of this defensive system, and some spaces that Man City were able to exploit at times in their most recent match. In situations where the opponents are able to hold on to possession and drag Spurs further and further up the pitch, it can create these big gaps in front of the defensive line. The defenders can't push forward as they have to cover the strikers, and if just one player loses track of their man, it can quickly create a chain reaction of free players and lead to an opportunity. Take for example this goal kick from Man City. Because of this defensive principle, Spurs are not keeping to a specific defensive line, and Haaland starts from an extremely advanced position high up the pitch, stretching the defence and creating a big gap in the centre that Marmoush can run into. In this situation, City do get a bit lucky with the bounce, but it is definitely a space that teams will look to exploit. In general, these long balls from the back are a difficult situation to deal with. For example here with Spurs being dragged high up the pitch and Trafford going long. Even though Spence is unchallenged for the aerial duel, the loose ball is picked up by Oscar Bob, and City now have a lot of free space to run into. This system being implemented by Thomas Frank makes Spurs unpredictable and hard to contain. But this same expansiveness they use in attack could lead to some defensive vulnerabilities if their press isn't successful. If Spurs find a way to balance these two approaches, then Thomas Frank's revival of this old school tactic could be one of the most interesting elements of this Premier League season. But what do you think of these tactics being implemented at Spurs, and where do you think they're going to finish this season? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And don't forget to download FOTMob to stay up to date with all things Premier League this season. Thanks for watching.